The wedding invitation arrived on embossed ivory cardstock, my cousin Blake's name intertwined with his fiancée Vanessa's in elegant gold script. I should have been delighted. Instead, a sense of dread washed over me as I stared at the envelope that had been forwarded 3 times before reaching me. I couldn't have known then that being seated behind a massive marble column at their reception would set off a chain of events that would not only transform my career, but ultimately lead me to cancel the very resort where they plan to spend their honeymoon. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The Rosewood Ballroom glittered with thousands of fairy lights as I navigated through clusters of guests, champagne flute in hand, searching for table 17. Blake and Vanessa's wedding was exactly as I'd expected. Extravagant, meticulous, and designed to impress the 300 guests who represented Atlanta's social elite. I'd flown in from Seattle, where I'd been quietly building my travel consultancy, business over the past 4 years specializing in sustainable luxury experiences. "Olivia, you made it!" My mother appeared, elegant in navy blue, relief washing over her face. "We weren't sure if you'd come." "Of course I came," I replied, kissing her cheek. "Blake's my cousin. Why wouldn't I be here?" My mother gave me a look. That spoke volumes. "Well, after what happened with the family business?" She trailed off, uncomfortable. What had happened was that I'd declined joining Hartwell Hotels, the family chain my Uncle Richard, Blake's father, had built from a single roadside motel into a respectable regional brand. Uncle Richard had never forgiven me for choosing my own path instead of accepting the management position he'd created, specifically to keep me within the family empire. The fact that my small consultancy now partnered with exclusive eco-resorts that competed with several Hartwell properties wasn't something we discussed at family gatherings. Ancient history, I assured her, though we both knew it wasn't. "Now, where's table 17? My mother's expression shifted to discomfort. "It's over there." She gestured vaguely toward the far side of the ballroom. "I tried to get them to move you, but Blake and Vanessa handled the seating personally." I found table 17 tucked in the far corner of the ballroom, half obscured behind one of the room's ornate marble columns. My place card sat precisely in the column's shadow, guaranteeing I would see absolutely nothing of the reception, speeches, or first dance. Around me were seated distant relatives I barely knew, and 2 colleagues of Vanessa's who had apparently fallen from favor during wedding planning. "You must be Olivia," said the elderly woman to my right as I took my seat. "I'm your great-aunt Meredith. We met when you were 5. "Lovely to see you again," I said automatically, even as I scanned the room. The slight was unmistakable. Every other Hartwell family member was seated prominently at tables near the front. Even my younger brother, who had only grudgingly attended, had been placed at table 3 with a perfect view of the head table. The woman to my left leaned over. "I'm Patricia. I used to work with Vanessa until I got promoted to a position she wanted," she whispered with a knowing smile. "Welcome to the reject table." As dinner was served, I strained to hear the toasts and speeches from behind our marble barricade. The few glimpses I caught of the celebration came when I rose from my seat and craned my neck around the column. During one such moment, I locked eyes with Uncle Richard across the room. He raised his champagne flute slightly, his expression unreadable, before turning back to the festivities. I excused myself between the main course and dessert, needing a moment away from the feeling of being deliberately hidden. In the hallway outside the ballroom, I scrolled through emails on my phone, focusing on work to distract myself from the hurt. An urgent message from Kairos Resorts caught my attention. The exclusive eco-luxury chain was seeking consultation on their new property opening in the Maldives. They needed someone to evaluate their sustainability practices while maintaining their 6-star service reputation. Hiding out here? I looked up to find my cousin Blake standing before me in his tailored tuxedo, champagne in hand, cheeks flushed from celebration. "Just catching up on work," I replied, sliding my phone into my clutch. Congratulations, by the way. Everything is beautiful. Thanks. He seemed genuinely pleased to see me, which made the seating arrangement all the more confusing. I'm glad you came. Dad wasn't sure you would. Why wouldn't I? I asked carefully. You know, the tension since you turned down the job. Blake shrugged. Dad took it personally. He had big plans for you in the company. Plans he never discussed with me, I pointed out. Blake sipped his champagne. Yeah, well, that's Dad. Anyway, you've done well for yourself with your ecotourism thing, though I don't really get why anyone would pay a premium to compost on vacation. I bit back a response about Hartwell Hotel's wasteful practices. This wasn't the time or place. It's a growing market. People want luxury experiences without the environmental guilt. If you say so. His attention was already drifting back to the ballroom. Oh, by the way, I saw they put you at 17. Sorry about that. Vanessa handled the seating chart. Behind the column, I said flatly. Blake had the grace to look uncomfortable. Is it? I didn't realize. We could try to— It's fine, I interrupted. I've had a perfect view of the column's marble veining all evening. Quite educational. Look, Liv, Blake lowered his voice. I know things have been weird with Dad, but I've always stayed out of it. You made your choice, and he made his. Before I could respond, Uncle Richard appeared in the doorway. Blake, there you are. Vanessa's looking for you. It's almost time for the cake cutting. His gaze fell on me, his expression cooling. Olivia, enjoying the evening? As much as one can from behind a column, I replied. A flash of something, guilt, satisfaction, crossed his face before his business smile returned. Seating at these events is always challenging. I'm sure Vanessa did her best with the constraints. Of course, I said, matching his tone. The column and I have become quite close. Blake shifted uncomfortably between us. I should get back to Vanessa. Liv, are you coming for the cake? I wouldn't want to disappoint my column. It might miss me. As they walked away, I heard Uncle Richard murmur to Blake. Still has that attitude problem. This is why she wouldn't have worked out in the company. Too much ego, not enough loyalty. I stood frozen in the hallway, the words landing like slaps. After all these years, he still viewed my career choice as personal betrayal rather than professional independence. The rejection of a job I'd never asked for had somehow morphed into a family mythology about my character. Back at table 17, as I picked at the exquisitely crafted dessert I couldn't taste, my phone buzzed with another email from Kairos Resorts. They needed an answer soon. The consultation would begin in 2 weeks. The contract fee listed made me blink twice to confirm I'd read it correctly. Everything all right, dear? Great Aunt Meredith asked, noticing my expression. Yes, I said, a decision crystallizing as I looked at the email, then at the column blocking my view, then across the room where Uncle Richard was now laughing with Vanessa's father. Everything is perfectly clear now. Patricia leaned in again. Words of advice from one exile to another? Success is the best revenge. As the newlyweds cut their cake, a moment I witnessed only in the reflection of a distant mirror, I composed my response to Kairos Resorts, accepting their offer. What I didn't know then was that this decision would set in motion events that would put me in direct opposition to the Hartwell family in ways none of us could have anticipated. I raised my champagne in a silent toast to the column that had become my unwitting companion for the evening. To new beginnings, I whispered, as I hit send on the email that would change everything. A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. The Sunday brunch following Blake and Vanessa's wedding was held at the Hartwell Grand, the flagship property of my uncle's hotel chain. As I handed my car keys to the valet, I took in the imposing limestone facade with its elegant portico and perfectly manicured hedges. Everything about the property screamed traditional luxury and traditional waste. The sprinklers watering, the lush green lawn during a Georgia drought, the lineup of idling luxury cars, the plastic-wrapped amenities I knew awaited guests in their rooms. "Livy!" My brother Noah waved from the entrance, looking slightly hungover in rumpled business casual. "Wasn't sure you'd show after last night's column debacle." "I'm not one to skip family obligations," I replied, giving him a quick hug, even when said family shoves me behind marble architecture. Noah winced sympathetically. "That was cold. I tried to tell Mom to raise hell about it, but you know how she gets around Uncle Richard." He lowered his voice as we entered the opulent lobby. Executive Director of Conflict Avoidance. That's her official title. I laughed despite myself. Noah had always been good at diffusing tension, a skill he'd perfected growing up in the shadow of the Hartwell family dynamics. Unlike me, he'd found a comfortable middle ground, working in finance in Chicago. Close enough to the family to maintain relationships, far enough away to escape the gravitational pull of Hartwell hotels. The brunch was set up in the hotel's conservatory, a glass-enclosed space overlooking gardens that had been featured in Luxury Travel magazine. Most of the wedding guests had already departed, leaving only immediate family and a few close friends. Blake and Vanessa held court at the center table, accepting congratulations and discussing their upcoming honeymoon. 2 weeks at the Azurine, resort in the Maldives, Vanessa was telling my mother as we approached. Blake surprised me with the reservation. It's impossible to get in. They're booked solid for the next 18 months, but Blake pulled some strings. My steps faltered slightly at the mention of the Azurine. It was Kairos Resort's most exclusive property, the very chain that had just hired me as a consultant. "Olivia," Uncle Richard's booming voice carried across the room. "Come, sit. We saved you a seat." He gestured to an empty chair, directly opposite him, with no columns in sight. The message was clear. Here, in his hotel, he controlled who was visible. I smiled tightly and took the offered seat. "Beautiful venue, Uncle Richard." "One of our best properties," he replied, chest puffing slightly with pride. "We're expanding the conference facilities next year. The demand is tremendous." "At the expense of the East Garden?" I asked, noting the architectural renderings displayed near the entrance. His eyes narrowed slightly. "Progress requires sacrifice. Something not everyone understands." The implied criticism hung in the air between us. 4 years ago, when I declined his job offer, we had a heated argument about the future of hospitality. I'd advocated for sustainable luxury. He'd dismissed it as a passing fad that would never generate serious revenue. "The Azurine has a 3-month waiting list even with their premium pricing," I said conversationally, turning to Blake and Vanessa. "How did you manage to secure a reservation?" Blake exchanged a quick glance with his father. "Dad has connections. The owner of Kairos and Dad go way back." "Jacob Chen?" I asked, naming the founder of Kairos Resorts. Uncle Richard nodded, looking mildly impressed that I knew the name. "We were at Cornell together, competed for the same hospitality award. I won." He chuckled. "Jacob's done well with his niche market, though it's hardly the scale of what we've built at Hartwell." I bit my tongue to avoid pointing out that Kairos properties commanded room rates nearly triple those of Hartwell hotels, with higher occupancy rates and industry-leading customer satisfaction scores. "Their sustainability initiatives are impressive," I offered instead. "They've reduced water consumption by 60% while actually increasing guest satisfaction with their shower experience." "Ah, yes. Your little eco-tourism consulting," Uncle Richard said dismissively. "How is that going? Finding enough clients to keep the lights on?" "It's going quite well," I replied evenly. "In fact, I just signed a major contract yesterday." My mother perked up. "That's wonderful, dear. With whom?" I hesitated, weighing my options. Revealing my connection to Kairos now would create immediate Tension. Keeping it private would only delay the inevitable. I've been engaged as a sustainability consultant for a resort group, I said, choosing my words carefully. I'll be evaluating their practices and making recommendations for improvements while maintaining luxury standards. Very nice, Uncle Richard said, in a tone that suggested the opposite. A small consultancy like yours is landing a significant client. Which hotel group would that be? Before I could formulate a response, Vanessa jumped in. Enough business talk at brunch. Olivia, tell us about Seattle. Are you seeing anyone? Settling down anytime soon? The not-so-subtle pivot to my personal life was a familiar tactic at family gatherings. At 33, my unmarried status was viewed with a mixture of concern and disapproval, particularly by the older generation who measured success in wedding bands and children rather than business achievements. Seattle is wonderful, I replied. My business keeps me busy, but I've built a great community there. Community is nice, Aunt Diane, Uncle Richard's wife said with a sympathetic smile. But there's nothing like family. The implication was clear. My chosen family in Seattle was somehow less legitimate than the biological connections I'd physically distanced myself from. Speaking of family, Blake interjected, we've finalized the guest list for the small dinner next Saturday before we leave for the honeymoon. We'd love to have you there, Olivia, if you're still in town. The invitation surprised me. After the column incident, I'd assumed I'd be scratched from any further celebrations. That's thoughtful, but I'll be traveling for work by then, I said truthfully. My flight to the Maldives leaves Thursday. The reaction around the table was immediate. Uncle Richard's fork clattered against his plate. Vanessa's perfectly maintained smile froze. Blake's brow furrowed in confusion. The Maldives? My mother asked. What a coincidence. Yes, Uncle Richard said slowly, studying me with newfound intensity. Quite a coincidence indeed. Would this business trip happen to involve Kairos Resorts by any chance? The moment of truth had arrived sooner than I'd anticipated. Yes, actually. They've hired me to evaluate their sustainability programs across all their properties, starting with the Azurine. A heavy silence fell over the table. Uncle Richard's face darkened with each passing second. Jacob hired you? He finally asked, his voice dangerously quiet. My niece? I don't believe Mr. Chen knows we're related, I replied calmly. My reputation in sustainable luxury consulting stands on its own merits. Of course it does, Blake said quickly, trying to diffuse the situation. That's great, Liv. Maybe we'll see you there. I doubt it, Uncle Richard cut in. Olivia will be far too busy with her consulting to socialize with family. He practically spat the word consulting as though it were a vulgar term. Actually, I said, meeting his gaze directly, my work will mostly involve staff interviews and systems evaluation. I'll have evenings free. Perhaps we could have dinner one night at the resort. The offer was genuine, an olive branch extended across years of tension. For a moment, I thought Uncle Richard might accept it. Then his expression hardened. Jacob Chen has always had a flair for the dramatic, he said coolly. Hiring you is clearly his idea of a joke at my expense. I wonder what the board of Hartwell hotels would think if they knew my own niece was aiding our competitor? Richard, my mother began, but he cut her off with a sharp gesture. No, Catherine. Your daughter made her choice years ago. Now she's just making it abundantly clear where her loyalties lie. With that, he stood abruptly, dropping his napkin on his half-eaten meal. If you'll excuse me, I have calls to make. As he stalked away, I became acutely aware of the stares from around the table. My mother looked distressed, Noah uncomfortable, Blake embarrassed. Vanessa, however, watched me with newfound interest, as though seeing me for the first time. Well, she said into the awkward silence, I suppose we'll be seeing more of you than expected, Olivia. What none of them realized, what I myself didn't yet fully understand, was that this coincidence was about to escalate into a confrontation that would reshape not just my relationship with the Hartwells, but the trajectory of my entire career. Monday. Morning dawned gray and drizzly in Atlanta, matching my mood as I packed my suitcase in my hotel room. I'd planned to stay until Wednesday, spending time with my mother before heading to the Maldives, but after yesterday's brunch confrontation, I was seriously considering changing my flight. My phone buzzed with a text from Noah. Damage control. Coffee? I'm downstairs in the lobby. 20 minutes later, I slid into a booth across from my brother at a cafe 2 blocks from my hotel. Noah pushed a latte toward me, already familiar with my order. So, he began. That went well, I snorted. Understatement of the year. Uncle Richard has been on the warpath since you left, Noah said, lowering his voice despite the cafe being nearly empty. 3 calls with Blake, 2 with Mom, and according to Blake, he was up half the night on the phone with business associates. All because his niece got a consulting contract? I shook my head in disbelief. His reaction is completely disproportionate. Noah stirred his coffee thoughtfully. It's not just any contract, though, is it? It's with Jacob Chen. There's history there that goes beyond business. What do you mean? You really don't know? Noah looked surprised. I thought everyone in the family knew the Jacob Chen story. I've been the family pariah for 4 years, I reminded him. I miss a lot of gossip. Noah leaned forward. It wasn't just a hospitality award they competed for at Cornell. It was a woman, Aunt Diane. I nearly choked on my coffee. What? Before she was Aunt Diane, she was Diane Lowry, hospitality management prodigy and the most sought-after graduate in their class. Both Uncle Richard and Jacob Chen were crazy about her. The competition for that industry award was really a proxy war for her attention. And Uncle Richard won both, I concluded. Exactly. But according to Mom, Jacob never quite got over it. When he founded Kairos Resorts, he poached several key executives from Hartwell's early properties. There's been bad blood for decades. I sat back, processing this new information. So Uncle Richard thinks Jacob hired me to deliberately provoke him? That's absurd. Jacob Chen probably doesn't even know we're related, doesn't he? Noah raised an eyebrow. Your LinkedIn profile lists Hartwell as your family name. Anyone with Google could make the connection. The thought had crossed my mind during the brunch, but I'd dismissed it. Now I wasn't so sure. Even if that's true, I argued, I was hired for my expertise. My company has an exceptional track record with sustainable luxury consulting. I know that, Noah assured me. But Uncle Richard sees everything through the lens of loyalty and betrayal. And in his mind, you've just aligned yourself with his oldest enemy. I sipped my coffee, frustrated. This is ridiculous. I'm a professional. Doing my job. It has nothing to do with family politics. Doesn't it, though? Noah's voice was gentle. You could have chosen any sector for your consultancy, yet you picked luxury eco-resorts, the exact opposite of everything Hartwell Hotels stands for. That's not coincidental. His observation struck uncomfortably close to home. I had indeed been drawn to sustainable luxury as a rejection of Hartwell's waste-heavy business model. But my career wasn't about spite. It was about creating a hospitality industry I could believe in. My consulting work isn't about Uncle Richard, I insisted. It's about building a better future for the industry. I believe you, Noah said. But perception is reality in the Hartwell universe. And right now, the perception is that you're Jacob Chen's newest weapon in a decades-old grudge. Match. My phone buzzed with an incoming email. I glanced down to see a message from Kairos Resorts with the subject line, Updated itinerary, consultant visit. I opened it to find a revised schedule with a personal note from Jacob Chen himself. Ms. Hartwell, I look forward to meeting you. Next week. I've adjusted your arrival to coincide with a special event at the Azarine, a preview dinner for our upcoming sustainability showcase. I believe your unique perspective will be valuable, particularly given your family background in traditional hospitality. Your uncle and I have different visions of luxury, and I'm eager to hear your thoughts on bridging these perspectives. Noah watched my expression change as I read. What is it? I wordlessly handed him my phone. He read quickly, his eyes widening. Well, he said finally, that answers that question. Jacob Chen absolutely knows who you are. A cold knot formed in my stomach. I'm being used as a pawn in their rivalry. Maybe, Noah conceded, returning my phone. Or maybe Jacob genuinely values your expertise and sees your family connection as an added bonus. The question is, what are you going to do about it? Before I could answer, my phone rang. A Seattle number I recognized as my assistant Morgan's. Sorry, I need to take this, I told Noah, accepting the call. Morgan, what's up? Olivia, thank God. Morgan sounded breathless. I've been trying to reach you. We have a situation. What kind of situation? Someone's been calling our major clients, telling them that Hartwell Sustainable Consulting is facing a conflict of interest investigation and may be sharing proprietary information with competitors. The cold knot in my stomach twisted tighter. Who's been calling? They wouldn't give their name, but 3 different clients received nearly identical calls this morning. 2 of them have already requested emergency meetings to discuss our contracts. I met Noah's concerned gaze across the table as the implications sank in. This wasn't just family drama anymore. Someone was actively trying to sabotage my business. Get everybody on damage control, I instructed Morgan. Call every client personally, explain that these claims are completely false, and offer to provide our conflict of interest policies. Set up those emergency meetings for me to handle remotely. And contact our lawyer. We need to know our options. If this continues. After ending the call, I relayed the situation to Noah, whose expression had darkened considerably. You think Uncle Richard is behind this? He stated rather than asked. Who else would it be? The timing is too perfect. I ran a hand through my hair, anger replacing shock. He's actually trying to destroy my business because I took a contract he doesn't like. Noah was silent for a moment, his loyalty visibly torn. This crosses a line, he finally said. Even for him. I need to confront him, I decided, gathering my things. This stops now. Olivia, wait. Noah caught my arm. Confronting Uncle Richard when he's like this will only escalate things. Let me talk to him first, and say what? Please stop trying to ruin your niece's livelihood because of your decades-old rivalry with Jacob Chen. Something like that, Noah admitted. But from someone he doesn't currently see as the enemy. I hesitated, recognizing the wisdom in his approach. Fine. But if it doesn't stop immediately, I'm taking legal action. I've worked too hard to build my company to let it be destroyed by petty family drama. Noah nodded. Fair enough. I'll call you after I speak with him. As we parted outside the cafe, the drizzle had intensified to a steady rain. I pulled my jacket tighter, an apt metaphor for how I needed to armor myself against the storm brewing, in my professional life. Back in my hotel room, I spent the morning on video calls with concerned clients, reassuring them that Hartwell Sustainable Consulting operated with the highest ethical standards, and that all client information was strictly confidential. Most seemed satisfied, but the damage to my company's reputation had been done. The whispers of impropriety would linger. By early afternoon, I still hadn't heard from Noah. Restless and frustrated, I decided to change my approach. If Uncle Richard wanted to make this about family loyalty, I would appeal to the one person whose loyalty might actually matter to him, my mother. I found her at her small townhouse on the outskirts of Atlanta, tending to her garden despite the intermittent rain. She looked up as I approached, unsurprised by my unannounced visit. I wondered when you'd show up, she said, removing her gardening gloves. Come inside. I'll make tea. The interior of my mother's home was a stark contrast to the Hartwell aesthetic, warm, cluttered with books and art, prioritizing comfort over impression. It had always been a refuge from the sleek perfection demanded by the Hartwell name. "Richard called," she said as she set the kettle to boil. "He's very upset. He's calling my clients and trying to destroy my business," I countered. "I think I have more right to be upset." My mother sighed, the weight of decades of family mediation evident in her posture. "He shouldn't have done that. I told him as much." And he feels betrayed, Olivia. You have to understand what Jacob Chen represents to him. "I know about Aunt Diane," I said. "Noah told me." My mother's eyebrows rose slightly. "Noah told you part of the story." "There's more." She poured hot water over tea bags, the familiar ritual buying her time to organize her thoughts. "Jacob and Richard were once friends, best friends. They were going to start a hotel chain together after graduation. They had plans, investors, lined up, even a name. What happened? The hospitality award came with seed funding, significant funding. Richard won, but proposed they still partner as planned. Then Diane chose Richard, and suddenly Jacob wanted to go his own way. He took their joint business plan, much of which Richard had developed, and started a competing concept with different investors. "So this is about intellectual property, not just a woman?" I asked, taking the steaming mug she offered. "It's about betrayal," she corrected gently. Jacob took their shared vision and built it without Richard. The sustainable luxury concept that Kairos is known for? That was originally Richard's idea. I nearly dropped my tea. "What? But Hartwell Hotels is the opposite of sustainable." My mother nodded sadly. After Jacob left, Richard deliberately went in the opposite direction. Traditional luxury, bigger properties, more amenities. He was determined to outsucceed Jacob on a different path. The revelation shifted my understanding of both men. So when I started a sustainable luxury consultancy, it felt like another betrayal, my mother confirmed. Family choosing Jacob's path over his. I absorbed this new context, seeing my uncle's actions in a different light, not justified, but at least comprehensible. "Mom, I had no idea about any of this when I chose my career path. But even knowing it now, it doesn't excuse what he's doing to my business." "No, it doesn't," she agreed, surprising me with her directness. "Richard is wrong to attack your livelihood, but understanding why he's doing it might help you find a way to resolve this that doesn't destroy what's left of your relationship with him." I stared into my tea, torn between empathy for my uncle's old wounds and anger at his current actions. One thing was becoming increasingly clear. The conflict between Kairos Resorts and Hartwell Hotels wasn't just business. It was deeply personal. And now, whether I liked it or not, I was caught in the middle of a decades-old vendetta that threatened everything I'd worked for. "I can't back out of my contract with Kairos," I said finally. "It would be unprofessional and could ruin my reputation in the industry." "I wouldn't ask you to," my mother replied. "But perhaps there's a way forward that acknowledges both your professional obligations and your family connections." As rain pattered against the windows, I wondered what such a path might look like, and whether Uncle Richard would even allow it to exist. What had started with a slight at a wedding reception had escalated into a conflict that could define my professional future. And I was only just beginning to understand the true stakes of the game I'd unwittingly entered. Tuesday morning arrived, with a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt since arriving in Atlanta. After a night of tossing and turning, weighing my mother's revelations against Uncle Richard's actions, I'd made a decision. I would proceed with the Kairos contract, but on my own terms, not as a pawn in Jacob Chen's vendetta. My phone chimed. With a text from Noah, "Spoke with Uncle Richard. Didn't go well. Can we meet?" We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe near my hotel. When I arrived, Noah was already there, looking tired and frustrated. "That bad?" I asked, sliding into the seat across from him. "Worse," Noah admitted. He wouldn't even discuss calling off the client's sabotage, just kept saying, "She made her choice" over and over. I felt a surge of anger, quickly tempered by determination. Then I'll make another choice, one he's not expecting. Noah eyed me warily. "Why do I get the feeling I should be worried?" "Because you know me well," I replied, pulling out my laptop. "I've been up since dawn researching Jacob Chen, Kairos Resorts, and their history with Hartwell Hotels. There's a lot more to this story than Mom told us." I turned the screen toward Noah, showing him an article from a hospitality industry publication dated 15 years earlier. The headline read, "Eco-Luxury Pioneer Kairos Resorts Launches First Property Amid Controversy." The controversy was a lawsuit from Hartwell Hotels claiming intellectual property theft, I explained. Uncle Richard alleged that Jacob stole proprietary sustainability concepts they'd developed together at Cornell. Noah skimmed the article. "It says the case was settled out of court." "For an undisclosed sum," I confirmed. "But here's where it gets interesting. After the settlement, every Kairos property has included this line in their founding documentation." I pointed to a paragraph near the bottom of the screen. "In recognition of the pioneers of sustainable hospitality, including Richard Hartwell, whose early vision contributed to the industry's evolution." Noah's eyebrows shot up. "Uncle Richard gets a credit in every Kairos resort?" I had no idea. "Neither did I, and I'm willing to bet most people don't notice it. It's buried in the corporate documentation, not displayed publicly." I closed the laptop. Jacob Chen may have taken their joint vision and run with it, but he did acknowledge Uncle Richard's contribution, at least legally. Does Uncle Richard know about this? He must, since it was part of the settlement, but I doubt it gives him much satisfaction, given how resentful he still is. Noah leaned back, considering the implications. "So what's your plan?" I've requested. "A call with Jacob Chen before I leave for the Maldives. I want to understand exactly what he expects from me and make it clear that I won't be used as leverage in his feud with my uncle." "You think he'll be honest about his intentions?" "Probably not entirely," I admitted. "But I'll learn more from the conversation than I know now, and in the meantime, I need to address the damage Uncle Richard is doing to my business." As if on cue, my phone rang. Morgan again. "2 more clients received calls," she reported after I answered. "And one of our biggest accounts is putting our contract on hold pending an internal review. Olivia, we're looking at potentially losing 30% of our annual revenue if this continues." My stomach clenched. The business I'd built from nothing was being systematically dismantled, all because of a family grudge I'd unwittingly stepped into. "I'm handling it," I assured her, with more confidence than I felt. "Tell the team to stay focused on delivering for the clients who aren't wavering. I'll be back in Seattle tomorrow to manage the crisis in person." After ending the call, I looked at Noah, who had clearly overheard enough to understand the situation. "This is getting out of hand," he said quietly. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to see Uncle Richard," I decided. "Today. Face to face." Noah shook his head. "He won't. Listen, he's convinced you've betrayed the family. Maybe. But I need to try before I take more drastic measures." "Like what?" I didn't answer directly. "I'll let you know after I speak with him." An hour later, I stood in the lobby of Hartwell Hotels, corporate headquarters, a gleaming glass tower in downtown Atlanta. I hadn't called ahead, knowing Uncle Richard would refuse to see me. Instead, I'd texted his executive assistant, Marlene, who had always been fond of me during my summer internships at the company. "Olivia." Marlene's face registered surprise as she emerged from the elevator. "I wasn't sure it was really you texting. Richard is in meetings all afternoon." "Is he really? Or is that what he told you to say if I showed up?" I asked knowingly. Marlene's expression softened. "He's actually in a budget review until 4. But he was quite clear about not being disturbed. Especially by family. Marlene, he's actively trying to destroy my business." I wouldn't be here if it wasn't serious. She hesitated, loyalty to her boss warring with her personal ethics. I can't get you into his office, she said finally. But he always takes a coffee. Break at 3 in the executive lounge at 17. That's all I can tell you. I squeezed her hand gratefully. Thank you. At precisely 3 o'clock, I stepped off the elevator on the 17th floor. The executive lounge was an exclusive retreat for the company's top leadership, a space I'd rarely been invited to enter even during my internships. I spotted Uncle Richard immediately, standing alone by the floor-to-ceiling windows, coffee in hand, gazing out at the Atlanta skyline. For a moment, I simply observed him. At 62, Richard Hartwell was still an imposing figure. Tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that projected authority and success. He'd built Hartwell Hotels from that single roadside motel into a chain with 37 properties across the southeastern United States. Whatever his flaws, his business acumen was undeniable. He sensed my presence before I spoke, his reflection in the glass stiffening as he recognized me. I told Marlene no visitors, he said without turning. She followed your instructions, I replied, walking toward him. This is my doing, not hers. He turned slowly, his expression carefully neutral. Olivia, what could possibly be so urgent that you'd ambush me at my office? You know exactly why I'm here. You're calling my clients, spreading lies about my business. Practices. It needs to stop. I'm merely informing potential partners about a conflict of interest they should be aware of. There is no conflict of interest, I countered. My work with Kairos has nothing to do with Hartwell Hotels. Everything about Kairos has to do with Hartwell, he snapped, the neutral mask slipping. Jacob Chen has been trying to undermine me for 30 years. Now he's using my own niece as his latest weapon. I'm not a weapon, Uncle Richard. I'm a consultant doing my job. Your job. He practically spat the words. You could have had a real job here, with your family, building something meaningful. Instead, you chose to be Jacob's puppet. The unfairness of his accusations stung, but I kept my voice level. I know about the lawsuit. I know about the settlement. I know he credits you in every Kairos Properties founding documentation. That got his attention. His eyes widened fractionally before narrowing again. Buried where no one will ever see. It. Cold comfort for having my life's vision stolen. Then why didn't you pursue it? I challenged myself. After the settlement, you could have developed your own eco-luxury concept, proven that you could do it better. Instead, you went in the opposite direction, creating properties that waste resources and ignore sustainability completely. I built what the market wanted, he defended. No, I corrected gently. You built what would make you the most different from Jacob. You let your resentment dictate your business strategy. Color rose in his cheeks. You have no idea what you're talking about. You weren't there. You're right, I wasn't. But I'm here now, watching you try to destroy my livelihood because of a grudge that's older than I am. Is that really the legacy you want, Uncle Richard? To be known as the man who sabotaged his own niece's career? For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. Then his expression hardened again. You made your choice when you signed with Kairos. Now live with the consequences. He brushed past me toward the exit, but I caught his arm. I have a call scheduled with Jacob Chen tomorrow, I said quietly. Before that call, I need to know, what would it take to end this feud? Not just for my sake, but for yours. He looked down at my hand on his arm, then back at my face. There's nothing Jacob Chen could offer me at this point. I don't believe that, I pressed. There must be something that would represent meaningful acknowledgement of what happened between you. Uncle Richard was silent for a long moment, seemingly weighing whether to continue the conversation. Finally, he said, public recognition, not hidden in legal documents no one reads. a clear statement that the sustainable luxury concept that built his empire was originally my vision. His voice had lost some of its hardness, revealing a glimpse of the old wound beneath. But he'll never do it. His ego wouldn't allow it. With that, he pulled away and strode to the elevator, leaving me alone in the executive lounge. I stood there for several minutes, processing our conversation. For the first time, I understood what truly drove my uncle's resentment. Not just the loss of a business concept, or even Aunt Diane, but the lack of recognition for his contribution to what became a revolutionary approach to hospitality. So, finally left the building, my phone rang, an unknown international number. I answered cautiously. Miss Hartwell? Jacob Chen. I understand you've requested a call. Mr. Chen? I acknowledged, surprised. Yes, I did, but I wasn't expecting to hear from you personally. I make it a point to speak directly with key consultants, he replied smoothly, especially those with unique perspectives on our industry. I understand you visited your uncle today. I stopped walking, a chill running through me. How could you possibly know that? His soft chuckle carried clearly across the international connection. Atlanta's hospitality community is smaller than you might think. News travels quickly. The implication was clear. Jacob Chen had sources within Hartwell Hotels. This feud ran deeper than I had imagined. Perhaps, he continued, we should advance our conversation to today rather than tomorrow. I believe we have much to discuss regarding your upcoming work with us and your family situation. As I stood in the shadow of the Hartwell Hotel's headquarters, I realized I was being offered an unexpected opportunity. Not just to defend my business, but potentially to resolve a decades-old conflict that had cast a shadow over both the Chen and Hartwell families. Yes, I agreed, my mind racing with possibilities. I think we do. The Highview Hotel's rooftop bar offered panoramic views of Atlanta's skyline, the city lights beginning to twinkle as dust settled. I'd chosen this location for my video call with Jacob Chen deliberately. Neutral territory, not a Hartwell property, but still firmly on my home turf. I arranged my laptop on the small table, positioning myself so the city lights created a professional backdrop. At precisely 6 o'clock, my screen lit up with an incoming call. Jacob Chen appeared before me, seated in what looked like a sleek office with a wall of glass behind him showing a tropical beach at dawn. The Maldives, presumably, where it would be early morning. At 64, Chen had the energetic appearance of a much younger man, with only his silver-streaked hair betraying his age. His tailored linen shirt and relaxed demeanor projected casual confidence. Ms. Hartwell, he greeted me with a slight nod. Thank you for accommodating this earlier conversation. Mr. Chen, I returned the professional courtesy. I appreciate you making time given the time difference. His smile was measured, revealing nothing. When one has interests spanning multiple time zones, one grows accustomed to unusual hours. I understand you've had an eventful few days since accepting our contract. That's putting it mildly, I replied, deciding directness was my best approach. Several of my clients have been contacted with false claims about conflicts of interest, threatening my company's reputation and financial stability. Chen's expression remained neutral. And you believe your uncle is behind these calls? I know he is. He practically admitted it. Richard always did prefer direct confrontation, Chen observed, a hint of something, nostalgia, amusement, flashing across his features, though usually not at the expense of family. Which brings me to my first question, I said, leaning slightly forward. Did you hire me because of my expertise in sustainable luxury consulting, or because of my relationship to Richard Hartwell? Chen considered me for a moment, as if recalculating his approach. Both, he finally admitted. Your firm's work is exceptional. We reviewed 3 consulting agencies before approaching you. But yes, your connection to Richard was a factor in our final decision. His honesty was refreshing, if uncomfortable. I won't be used as leverage in your feud with my uncle, I stated firmly. Leverage? Chen raised an eyebrow. An interesting choice of words. I prefer to think of it as synchronicity. You've built a career promoting exactly the vision Richard and I once shared. There's a certain poetry in that, don't you think? I wasn't interested in poetry. My uncle believes you're using me to antagonize him. He's retaliating by targeting my business. And yet you haven't withdrawn from our contract, Chen observed. Why is that, Ms. Hartwell? You could easily cite this family conflict as a reason to step away. It was a perceptive question, one I'd asked myself repeatedly over the past 2 days. Because I believe in the work, I answered honestly. Kairos Resorts represents the gold standard in sustainable luxury. Exactly the approach I've been advocating. Throughout my career, I won't pass up the opportunity to contribute to that, even if it complicates my family relationships. Chen nodded slowly, seeming pleased with my response. Your commitment to your principles is admirable. It reminds me of Richard, actually, the Richard I knew at Cornell, before competition and resentment changed him. He says the sustainable luxury concept was originally his idea, I ventured, watching Chen's reaction carefully. If I expected denial or anger, I was disappointed. Chen merely shrugged. We both contributed to the vision. Richard had brilliant insights about integrating sustainability without sacrificing luxury. I had the practical experience to implement and scale those insights. He paused, his expression growing more serious. But yes, many of the core concepts Kairos was built on emerged from our late-night conversations in university. I've never denied that. Except publicly, I pointed out. The settlement included acknowledgement in all our corporate documentation. Buried where no one sees it, I interrupted, echoing Uncle Richard's words. He wants public recognition. A clear statement that the sustainable luxury concept Kairos is built on was originally his vision. Chen's eyes narrowed slightly. Did Richard send you to negotiate on his behalf? No, I replied firmly. I'm here on my own behalf. My business is being damaged by this feud, and I need it to stop. I'm simply telling you what might make that possible. And you believe that public recognition would satisfy Richard after all these years? Chen sounded skeptical. I don't know, I admitted. But it would be a start. Chen was silent for a moment, seemingly lost in thought. When he spoke again, his tone had shifted, becoming more reflective. You know, we were going to call it Harmony Hotels, our joint venture. The name represented our vision: hospitality in harmony with nature, luxury in harmony with responsibility. He smiled faintly. Richard came up with that. He had a gift for distilling complex concepts into compelling language. The glimpse into their shared past was unexpected. What happened? I asked, genuinely curious. Beyond the competition and my aunt, I mean. Mom says you were best friends. A shadow crossed Chen's face. We were. The hospitality award was substantial, enough to launch our venture immediately, rather than seeking outside funding. When I lost, I congratulated Richard sincerely. We agreed to proceed with our partnership as planned. He sighed. Then Diane chose Richard, and suddenly everything changed. He became protective, suspicious. He began questioning my commitment, suggesting I might be using him for his ideas. Were you? I asked bluntly. Chen's laugh held no humor. No, but Richard's suspicion created a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more he questioned my motives, the more defensive I became. Eventually, I decided it was better to pursue the vision separately than to have my integrity questioned daily. So you took your shared concept and built Kairos without him. With appropriate legal settlement and acknowledgement, Chen corrected. But yes, essentially. He leaned forward, his expression intent. What few people know including Richard, is that I offered him a partnership again 5 years later, after the success of our first property proved the concept viable. He refused without even considering it. This new information shifted my understanding once again. The narrative wasn't as simple as theft and betrayal. It was a complex history of mutual hurt, pride, and missed opportunities for reconciliation. "Mr. Chen," I said carefully, "why are you telling me all this? What do you want from me beyond my consulting expertise?" "Perspective," he replied simply. "I hired you because your work is excellent, but also because I hoped you might provide fresh insight into this decades-old impasse. Richard and I are both stubborn men who've allowed pride to calcify what was once a meaningful friendship." He paused. "I'm not getting any younger, Ms. Hartwell. Neither is Richard. Perhaps it's time to consider what legacy we want to leave beyond successful hotel chains." His candor surprised me, suggesting a genuine desire for resolution rather than simply scoring points against an old rival. But one crucial question remained unanswered. "And my cousin's honeymoon at the Azarine? Was that part of your perspective gathering?" Chen's expression revealed nothing. Blake Hartwell's reservation came through normal channels. I became aware of it only after it was confirmed. I wasn't entirely convinced. "It's quite a coincidence. The hospitality world is full of coincidences," Chen replied smoothly. "But I understand your skepticism. What matters now is how we proceed." "I have a proposal," I said, having used the previous day to develop a potential solution, one that might benefit all parties involved. Chen gestured for me to continue, his interest evident. "Kairos is preparing to launch a major sustainability showcase at the Azarine," I began. "What if that showcase included a feature on the history of sustainable luxury, including proper credit to my uncle for his early contributions to the concept?" "You're suggesting we use the showcase to provide the public acknowledgement Richard wants," Chen summarized. "Exactly. It's an opportunity to recognize the past while demonstrating how Kairos has evolved the concept. You'd be acknowledging history while showcasing your leadership in the present." Chen considered the idea, tapping his fingers thoughtfully on his desk. "And you believe Richard would accept this gesture?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But it would be a genuine olive branch, one that serves Kairos's interests as well by adding historical depth to your sustainability narrative." "And what about the honeymoon reservation?" Chen asked. "Blake Hartwell and his new wife are scheduled to arrive 3 days after you." I hesitated, the final piece of my proposal more delicate. "I think we should cancel it." Chen's eyebrows shot up. "Cancel a confirmed reservation? That goes against everything the Azarine stands for." "Not cancel outright," I clarified. "Upgrade them to an even more exclusive Kairos property, perhaps the new villa collection on your private island. Position it as a special courtesy to the Hartwell family in recognition of their contribution to sustainable luxury hospitality." Slow smile spread across Chen's face as he grasped the elegance of the solution. "The gesture acknowledges Richard's contribution while creating a positive experience for his son, and it separates you from their honeymoon, avoiding any appearance of awkwardness or conflict." "Exactly," I confirmed. "It transforms a potential confrontation into a peace offering." Chen leaned back, studying me with newfound respect. "You have your uncle's strategic mind, Ms. Hartwell, but with a conciliatory approach he often lacked." He nodded decisively. "I'm inclined to accept your proposal, with one condition." "Which is that you personally oversee the historical content for the sustainability showcase. I want to ensure Richard's contribution is presented accurately and respectfully." It was a reasonable request, and one that aligned perfectly with my original consulting purpose. "Agreed." "Excellent." Chen's demeanor shifted to business efficiency. "I'll have my team prepare the upgrade for your cousin and his wife. We'll need to move quickly to adjust the sustainability showcase materials before your arrival." "And my uncle's campaign against my clients?" I pressed. That needs to stop immediately. Chen's expression grew serious. I can't control Richard's actions, but perhaps a gesture of good faith from Kairos might encourage him to reconsider his approach. What did you have in mind? An official letter from me to Richard, previewing our plans to acknowledge his contribution and inviting his input on how his early vision is presented. We'll copy you, of course, so you can share it with him personally, if appropriate. It wasn't a guarantee, but it was a concrete step toward resolution. That would be helpful. Consider it done, Chen assured me. Now, regarding your consulting work, I suggest we proceed as planned with your evaluation of our sustainability practices. Your unique perspective is even more valuable given these developments. As we concluded the call with the details of my arrival in the Maldives, I felt cautiously optimistic. What had begun as a crisis threatening my business had potentially transformed into an opportunity to heal a decades-old rift while enhancing my professional standing. Before I could fully process the conversation, my phone buzzed with a text from Noah. Uncle Richard just called me. Something about that snake Jacob reaching out to him. What did you do? I smiled, realizing Chen had wasted no time initiating contact. Hopefully, the beginning of a resolution. I'll explain tomorrow. As I packed up my laptop, gazing out at the Atlanta skyline, I couldn't help but reflect on the irony. Being seated behind a column at my cousin's wedding, a deliberate slight meant to make me invisible, had set in motion events that might now give me a central role in reshaping both my family's dynamics and my professional future. The slight, that had initially hurt and angered me, had become the catalyst for something potentially transformative. The question now was whether Uncle Richard would recognize the opportunity for what it was, or whether pride would continue to stand like a column between him and reconciliation. Wednesday morning arrived with a flurry of activity. Chen had been true to his word. Overnight, my inbox had received the official letter addressed to Uncle Richard, outlining Kairos Resort's plans to acknowledge his early contributions to sustainable luxury hospitality. The language was respectful and genuinely conciliatory, suggesting a desire to correct a long-standing oversight rather than merely placate a rival. I forwarded the letter to Uncle Richard with a simple note. An opportunity worth considering. My flight to Seattle was scheduled for that afternoon, giving me just enough time for a final meeting with Noah before I left Atlanta. We met for an early lunch at a quiet restaurant near the airport. I still can't believe you pulled this off, Noah said, shaking his head in amazement after I'd explained the arrangement with Chen. Uncle Richard has been fuming about Jacob Chen for 30 years, and you might have just brokered peace in 2 days. Let's not celebrate yet, I cautioned. Uncle Richard hasn't responded to the letter. For all I know, he's dismissed it entirely. Maybe, Noah conceded, but he called me last night asking what I knew about it. He sounded confused more than angry, like he couldn't quite process Chen reaching out after all this time. That was promising. Confusion was better than outright rejection. Did he say anything about stopping the calls to my clients? Noah grimaced. No, but he didn't mention continuing them either. It sounded like his focus had shifted entirely to Chen's letter. My phone buzzed with an incoming call. Morgan again. I excused myself to answer. Good news, Morgan announced, her voice lighter than it had been in days. 2 of the clients who were wavering just confirmed they're staying with us. They said they received a peculiar call apologizing for the misunderstanding about conflict of interest concerns. Relief washed over me. Did they say who called? Not by name, but they described an older man with a distinguished Southern accent who identified himself as a concerned industry colleague who had been misinformed. Uncle Richard. It had to be. That's excellent news, Morgan. How are things otherwise? Stabilizing, she reported. No new problem calls since yesterday morning. If this continues, we should be able to contain the damage. After finishing the call, I turned back to Noah with cautious optimism. It seems Uncle Richard might be calling off his campaign. See? Noah smiled. Progress already. We were about to order dessert when my phone rang again. Uncle Richard's number. I stared at the screen in surprise. Aren't you going to answer it? Noah prompted. I took a deep breath and accepted the call. Hello, Uncle Richard. Olivia. His voice was calm, betraying no emotion. I received Chen's letter. Yes, I thought. You might have. A pause. You orchestrated this. It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. I facilitated a conversation that was long overdue. Another pause. Longer this time. I'm at the Piedmont Club. I'd like to speak with you before you leave town. The Piedmont Club was one of Atlanta's oldest and most exclusive establishments, a place where the city's business elite conducted their most sensitive negotiations. Uncle Richard's invitation to meet there signaled the seriousness with which he was taking the situation. I can be there in 30 minutes, I replied, checking my watch. My flight's not until 4. I'll tell them to expect you. He ended the call abruptly. Noah raised an eyebrow questioningly. He wants to meet, I explained, already gathering my things. At the Piedmont Club. Noah whistled low. He's bringing out the big guns. Want me to come back? I shook my head. I think this needs to be between us. The Piedmont Club occupied the top floors of one of Atlanta's historic buildings, its wood-paneled walls and leather chairs exuding old-world power and discretion. I was escorted to a private meeting room where Uncle Richard waited, gazing out the window at the city below. He turned as I entered, his expression unreadable. Thank you for coming. Of course. I took the seat he indicated across from him at a small table already set with coffee service. He poured himself a cup, his movements precise and measured. Jacob's letter was unexpected. He seems genuine in his desire to acknowledge your contribution, I offered. Uncle Richard's laugh held little humor. Jacob Chen is genuine about advancing his own interests. Always has been. And what do you believe his interest is in this case? That's what I've been trying to determine. He studied me over his coffee cup. You spoke with him directly. I did. And? I chose my words carefully. He talked about legacy, about being at a point in life where old grudges seem less important than leaving things resolved. Sentimental nonsense, Uncle Richard scoffed, but there was less conviction in his voice than I expected. Is it? I challenged myself gently. You're both successful beyond what most people ever achieve. Your hotel chains are established, respected institutions. What's left to prove? He didn't answer immediately, his gaze drifting back to the window. Did Jacob tell you I refused his partnership offer 5 years after he launched Kairos? He mentioned it, yes. Did he tell you why? No. Uncle Richard nodded, as if confirming something to himself. I refused because he offered me exactly 25% ownership, the same percentage I'd offered him from my award money before. He walked away. His jaw tightened at the memory. It wasn't a partnership offer. It was a calculated insult. This revelation added another layer to their complicated history. What Chen had presented as an olive branch, Uncle Richard had interpreted as a deliberate slight. Perception shapes reality, I observed quietly. Precisely. Uncle Richard set down his cup with finality. Which is why I'm concerned about your involvement with Kairos, regardless of Chen's supposed olive branch. Your reputation, and by extension the Hartwell name, is at risk. My reputation is built on integrity and expertise, I countered. Working with Kairos enhances that reputation, not damages it. Unless Chen is using you to manipulate me. I've made it clear I won't be used that way, I assured him. The showcase acknowledgement was my idea, not his, and upgrading Blake and Vanessa's honeymoon was a solution I proposed to avoid awkwardness. Uncle Richard's eyebrows rose slightly. You suggested canceling their reservation? Upgrading, I corrected, to an even more exclusive Kairos property. as a courtesy to the Hartwell family. For the first time, a hint of genuine amusement crossed his features. Clever, and convenient for you to avoid an uncomfortable encounter. I won't deny there are personal benefits, I acknowledged. But the primary goal is to turn a potential conflict into a step toward resolution. Uncle Richard studied me with renewed intensity. You've grown into a formidable negotiator, Olivia. I've underestimated you. The admission, however reluctant, meant more than I expected. Thank you. Don't thank me yet, he cautioned. I haven't decided how to respond to Chen's overture. What would make it acceptable to you? I asked directly, beyond the public acknowledgement of your contribution. Uncle Richard leaned back, considering the question seriously. The acknowledgement would need to be substantive, not merely a footnote in their sustainability materials, and permanent, incorporated into the Kairos brand narrative going forward. That seems reasonable, I said carefully. What else? A consulting role? He said after a moment's reflection. Not operational. I have no interest in involving myself in Kairos's day-to-day business, but an advisory position on future sustainable initiatives, appropriately compensated. His eyes met mine directly. If my vision helped build their empire, I should have some voice in its evolution. The request surprised me, not because it was unreasonable, but because it revealed something I hadn't fully appreciated. Beyond recognition, Uncle Richard wanted participation. The chance to contribute to the sustainable luxury concept he'd helped pioneer, even if belatedly. I believe that could be arranged, I said thoughtfully. It would actually add credibility to their sustainability showcase to have both founders collaborating again after all these years. Uncle Richard's expression remained guarded, but I detected a flicker of interest. Perhaps. And the campaign against my clients? I pressed, unwilling to leave without addressing the direct threat to my business. His expression tightened, but he nodded reluctantly. I've already instructed concerned parties to clarify any misunderstandings about your professional practices. Thank you, I said simply. Don't misunderstand, he warned. I still believe your involvement with Kairos represents a conflict with family loyalty, but I won't actively damage your business while we navigate this situation. It wasn't a ringing endorsement, but it was a significant concession. I appreciate that. Uncle Richard glanced at his watch. You should get to the airport. I wouldn't want you to miss your flight to Seattle. The dismissal was clear but not unkind. As I stood to leave, he added, I'll be considering Chen's offer and the additional terms we've discussed. You'll have my decision before you depart for the Maldives. I look forward to it, I said, extending my hand professionally. He hesitated only briefly before shaking it. One question before you go. That ridiculous seating arrangement at the wedding, behind the column. Did that influence your decision to take the Kairos contract? The question caught me off guard with its directness. No, I answered honestly. I would have accepted the contract regardless, but it did make me less inclined to consider how the decision might affect Blake and Vanessa's honeymoon plans. Uncle Richard nodded, a hint of rueful understanding in his expression. Actions have consequences, a lesson Blake and Vanessa might be about to learn. As I left the Piedmont Club and headed toward the airport, I reflected on how dramatically circumstances had shifted in just a few days. What had begun as a petty slight at a wedding had escalated into a family crisis, then potentially transformed into an opportunity for long overdue reconciliation. The confrontation with Uncle Richard had gone better than I'd dared hope. He hadn't dismissed Chen's overture outright, had already taken steps to call off the attacks on my clients, and was considering terms that could lead to a meaningful resolution. But significant obstacles remained. Uncle Richard's distrust of Jacob Chen ran deep, rooted in decades of perceived betrayal and missed opportunities. Chen's sincerity was still questionable. Was he genuinely seeking reconciliation, or simply adding another chapter to their long-running competition. And then there was my cousin's honeymoon. I'd proposed canceling their Azarine reservation as a strategic solution, but I couldn't help wondering how Blake and Vanessa would react to this unexpected change, regardless of how luxurious the alternative might be. As my plane took off from Atlanta, bound for Seattle, I knew the most challenging conversations still lay ahead, and much depended on how Uncle Richard ultimately responded to the opportunity I'd created. Seattle greeted me with its familiar misty rain, a comforting change from Atlanta's intense summer heat. I'd barely settled into my downtown apartment when Morgan arrived for our emergency strategy session, armed with detailed reports on the status of each affected client relationship and a determined expression I'd come to rely on during business crises. "The damage is contained," she confirmed as we spread documents across my dining table. "We've retained all but one client, and even they've left the door open for future projects." She pushed a stack of files toward me. "These three actually increased their contracts after speaking with you yesterday. They were impressed by how you handled the situation. Sometimes a crisis becomes an opportunity to demonstrate your values," I reflected, scanning the updated agreements with a sense of relief. The business I'd built from nothing was battered but still standing. Morgan studied me with curiosity. "You seem different since Atlanta, more assured." "Confronting family demons will do that," I replied with a small smile. "Nothing like your uncle trying to destroy your business to clarify your priorities." "And the situation with his rival and your cousin's honeymoon? Where does that stand?" "Balanced on a knife's edge," I admitted, running a hand through my hair. "Uncle Richard is considering a truce with Jacob Chen, but 30 years of resentment doesn't dissolve overnight. And I'm still not sure how Blake and Vanessa will react to their honeymoon being upgraded to a different resort." "When will you know?" "Soon, hopefully. Uncle Richard promised a decision before I leave for the Maldives." I glanced at my watch. "Which means within the next 36 hours. We spent the afternoon rebuilding what Uncle Richard's campaign had threatened to destroy. I called key clients personally, explaining the situation in carefully measured terms that acknowledged the family conflict without casting either side as villains. Most responded with understanding and even sympathy. Many of them had their own complicated family business dynamics. "This whole situation reminds me of my father-in-law trying to sabotage our opening night," one client confided. "Family can be your greatest strength or your worst nightmare in business." By evening, I felt reasonably confident that Hartwell Sustainable Consulting would not only survive this crisis, but potentially emerge stronger. The clients who stayed were now more deeply connected through shared vulnerability and transparency. As Morgan departed with our revised client retention strategy, my phone chimed with an email alert from Chen's assistant. "Ms. Hartwell, please find attached the revised itinerary for your Maldives consultation, including the sustainability showcase preparations. Mr. Chen has instructed me to inform you that all arrangements for the Hartwell family upgrade have been prepared, pending final confirmation." The Azarine's diamond-over-water villa, originally reserved for Mr. and Mrs. Blake Hartwell, has been placed on hold for reassignment, and the Serenity Island private villa has been prepared as an alternative. We await your guidance on when and how to communicate this change to the guests. The email confirmed Chen was proceeding with our arrangement, but placed the responsibility for notifying Blake and Vanessa squarely on my shoulders. It was a reasonable delegation. They were my family, after all, but not a conversation I was looking forward to. I was contemplating how to approach this delicate communication when my phone rang. Blake's number. My stomach tightened as I answered. "Olivia." My cousin greeted me, his tone uncharacteristically serious. "We need to talk." "I was actually planning to call you," I replied, wondering how much he already knew. "Dad told me you've been meeting with Jacob Chen." No preamble, straight to the point. "He said you're working with Kairos now." "That's correct." "I've been hired as a sustainability consultant." A heavy pause. "And you knew we're honeymooning at the Azarine?" I found out at the post-wedding brunch, I confirmed, after I'd already accepted the contract. Dad says you're trying to have our reservation canceled. Blake's voice had an edge I rarely heard from my typically laid-back cousin. Not canceled, I corrected carefully. Upgraded. To Kairos's most exclusive property, their private island villa. It's a courtesy to the Hartwell family, in recognition of your father's contribution to sustainable luxury hospitality. So I've been told, Blake said, skepticism evident. What I can't figure out is why this is happening now, right after our wedding. Dad and Jacob Chen have been feuding since before we were born. Suddenly, you take a job with Kairos and everything changes? I chose my words carefully. Sometimes it takes a new perspective to break old patterns. Both your father and Jacob Chen have accomplished everything they set out to achieve professionally. Perhaps they're finally ready to acknowledge their shared history. Or perhaps you saw an opportunity to make a point after Vanessa seated you behind that column, Blake said bluntly. The directness of his accusation caught me off guard. Blake, the column was unfortunate, but it didn't drive my professional decisions. Really? His tone sharpened. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you took a job with Dad's biggest rival right after my wedding, and now you're messing with our honeymoon plans. Vanessa is upset, Olivia. She spent months researching the Azarine specifically. Felt a twinge of guilt I hadn't anticipated. In my focus on the larger conflict between Uncle Richard and Jacob Chen, I hadn't fully considered how personally Blake and Vanessa would take the change, regardless of how luxurious the alternative might be. I understand her frustration, I said more gently, and I'm sorry for the disruption. But my working relationship with Kairos creates an unavoidable complication. Would you and Vanessa truly be comfortable honeymooning at a resort where I'm simultaneously conducting a professional evaluation? Blake was silent for a moment, considering. I don't know, he finally admitted. But we should have been consulted before decisions were made about our honeymoon. You're right, I acknowledged. That was an oversight on my part, and I apologize. What would you prefer to do? If you and Vanessa have your heart set on the Azarine specifically, I'm sure we can work around my consultation schedule to minimize any awkwardness. Another pause, longer this time. Let me talk to Vanessa. We need to discuss it privately. Of course, take whatever time you need. As we ended the call, I felt a mixture of regret and frustration. In my attempt to solve the larger conflict between Uncle Richard and Jacob Chen, I'd steamrolled over Blake and Vanessa's preferences. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to correct one slight, I'd inadvertently committed another. I was still dwelling on this when my laptop chimed with an incoming video call, Jacob Chen again. Ms. Hartwell, he greeted me, the Maldivian sunrise now fully visible through the windows behind him. I trust you've returned safely to Seattle. Yes, thank you. I just had an enlightening conversation with my cousin about the honeymoon arrangements. Chen's expression revealed nothing. I gather he was not entirely pleased with our proposed solution. That's putting it mildly. It seems he and Vanessa had their hearts set specifically on the Azarine experience. Understandable, Chen nodded. However, the private island villa provides an even more exclusive experience, with personalized versions of all the Azarines, signature offerings. I explained that, but the issue seems to be more about not being consulted before changes were proposed. Chen considered this. A valid concern. Perhaps we acted hastily in our enthusiasm to resolve the larger situation. He adjusted something on his desk, then looked up with renewed focus. But we have more pressing matters to discuss. I've received a proposal from Richard Hartwell. My pulse quickened. Already? He told me he'd need time to consider. Richard was always decisive once he'd made up his mind, Chen observed with a hint of fondness that seemed genuine. His terms are essentially what you outlined from your meeting. Substantive recognition of his contribution, permanently incorporated into the Kairos narrative, plus a compensated advisory role on sustainability initiatives. And your response? I'm inclined to accept, with minor modifications to the advisory structure. Chen's expression was carefully neutral, but I detected an underlying satisfaction. After 30 years of estrangement, it would be appropriate to have Richard's insight contributing to Kairos's future sustainability innovations. Despite his measured tone, I sensed genuine emotion behind Chen's words, perhaps regret for opportunities lost or nostalgia for their former friendship. After discussing the remaining details of our arrangement, I raised the critical question. What about Blake and Vanessa's honeymoon? Given their attachment to the Azarine specifically, how do you suggest we proceed? Chen considered for a moment. What if we offered them a split stay? 3 nights at the Azarine for the specific experiences Vanessa was looking forward to, then transfer to the private island for the remainder of their stay? They'd get both experiences, and we'd have a window at the Azarine where we could conduct the more visible aspects of your consultation without concern for awkward encounters. That's actually brilliant, I said, genuinely impressed. The best of both worlds, positioned as an enhancement rather than a compromise. I'll have my team prepare the offer immediately. Chen nodded decisively. After ending the call, I sat quietly at my window, watching Seattle's lights shimmer through the evening mist. The past week had forced me to confront difficult truths about family, loyalty, and my own motivations. I'd begun this journey angry about being seated behind a column, a petty slight that had nonetheless crystallized years of feeling undervalued by the Hartwell side of my family. But somewhere along the way, my focus had shifted from righteous indignation to something more constructive, using my unique position to heal a decades-old wound that had affected not just Uncle Richard and Jacob Chen, but rippled through both families for generations. My phone chimed with a text from Blake. Talked with Vanessa. The split stay sounds amazing if it's really an option. Can we discuss details? Chen's team had already reached out to them with the new arrangement. I replied immediately. Absolutely. It's a genuine upgrade, not a consolation prize. Call tomorrow? His response came quickly. Perfect. And Liv? Thanks for finding a solution that works for everyone. Dad mentioned you've been instrumental in some kind of truce with Chen too. That small acknowledgement from Blake. Recognition that I was working toward resolution rather than revenge meant more than I expected. As I prepared for bed, my laptop chimed with one final email. From Uncle Richard, copying both Jacob Chen and me. Jacob, I've reviewed the terms of your proposal and find them acceptable with the minor adjustments we've discussed. The acknowledgement of my early contributions to sustainable luxury hospitality will correct a long-standing historical oversight, while the advisory role offers an appropriate platform for ongoing collaboration. Regarding the arrangements for Blake and Vanessa's honeymoon, the split stay between the Azarine and the private island villa seems an elegant solution that honors their preferences while accommodating the professional consultation schedule. I believe we have the opportunity to demonstrate that even decades old, disagreements can ultimately give way to mutual respect and recognition. Perhaps there's wisdom in not allowing pride to overshadow the legacy we might yet create together. Richard Hartwell, in that moment, I made my own final decision. I would approach the Kairos consultation not just as a professional opportunity, but as a chance to help rebuild a bridge between two once brilliant collaborators whose partnership had been derailed by misunderstanding and ego. What had begun with a petty slight at a wedding reception, being seated behind a column, had unexpectedly positioned me to facilitate healing of a rift I hadn't even fully understood a week ago. The journey ahead would undoubtedly hold more challenges, but for the first time, I felt certain of my path forward. My flight to the Maldives departed Seattle on Friday morning, a marathon journey involving 3 connections and nearly 24 hours of travel time. I'd spent Thursday finalizing client projects and preparing Morgan to handle operations during my 2-week absence. We've actually gained 2 new clients from referrals this week, Morgan reported. Apparently, your handling of the situation impressed more than just our existing accounts. Everything was proceeding smoothly, perhaps too smoothly. The first hint of trouble came during my layover in Dubai. An email from Blake appeared. "Liv, we have a situation. Dad and Vanessa's father got into it last night over dinner. Something about the honeymoon changes being manipulative and Chen's way of claiming victory. Now Vanessa's parents are insisting we cancel Kairos entirely and honeymoon at a Hartwell property instead. You know how Vanessa is with her father. Can you call when you get this?" I glanced at my watch. It was 2 a.m. in Atlanta. Calling Blake would have to wait until my next layover in Singapore. I sent a quick reply. "Just saw this during layover. We'll call from Singapore in about 7 hours. Ask Vanessa not to make any decisions until we talk." The Dubai-Singapore leg gave me ample time to contemplate this new complication. Vanessa's father, Howard Mitchell, was a successful commercial real estate developer who had invested in several Hartwell properties. His relationship with Uncle Richard was equal parts friendship and business alliance, cemented by their children's marriage. When I finally reached Blake from Singapore, the situation had deteriorated further. "Vanessa's furious," he explained, sounding exhausted. "Not just about the honeymoon chaos, but about being caught in the middle of this ancient feud between Dad and Chen." "I thought we'd found a solution with the split stay," I said. "We had, until her father got involved. Now she's saying she doesn't want to spend her honeymoon as a pawn in some petty power play between rival hotel chains." Her words, not mine, pinched the bridge of my nose trying to stave off a travel-induced headache. What does she want to do instead? That's just it. The original plan was the Azarine, which she'd spent months researching. The alternatives her father is pushing are all Hartwell properties, which would feel to her like her father hand-picked our honeymoon. "Which is exactly what would be happening," I observed. "Exactly." Blake sounded genuinely torn. "I don't care. Where we go as long as Vanessa's happy. But right now, there's no option that doesn't feel like we're choosing sides in a battle we never asked to join." The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to resolve the conflict between Uncle Richard and Jacob Chen, I'd inadvertently created a new one between Vanessa and her father, with Blake caught in the crossfire. "Let me talk to Chen," I suggested. There must be another option, perhaps a completely different luxury resort group with no connection to either family. At this point, I just want this resolved. Blake sighed. "Our departure is in 5 days, and instead of looking forward to it, Vanessa's in tears every time the honeymoon comes up." After promising Blake I'd find a solution, I immediately reached out to Chen's assistant requesting an urgent call. Chen responded quickly. He would be available during my final layover in Malay before the seaplane transfer to the Azarine. By the time I reached Malay International Airport, I was exhausted but determined to resolve the honeymoon crisis. The airport's VIP lounge provided enough privacy for a video call, though the Wi-Fi connection was less than ideal. Chen appeared on my screen, looking far fresher than I felt after 20-plus hours of travel. "Ms. Hartwell, you've nearly reached us. I trust your journey has been comfortable so far." "As comfortable as crossing half the globe can be," I replied, skipping pleasantries. "We have a problem with the honeymoon arrangements." I explained the situation with Vanessa's father and the increasing tension it was creating for the newlyweds. Chen listened without interruption, his expression growing thoughtful. "So now we have resistance not just from your uncle, but from the Mitchell family as well," he summarized. "Interesting how these family alliances can complicate what should be straightforward business arrangements." "This isn't about business alliances," I corrected him, perhaps more sharply than intended. "It's about a bride who just wants to enjoy her honeymoon without being pulled into a corporate rivalry that predates her birth." Chen nodded in acknowledgement. "You're quite right. The young couple's happiness should be our priority. What would you suggest as a solution? We need an option that doesn't force Blake and Vanessa to choose between family loyalties, something completely independent of both Kairos and Hartwell." "Perhaps," Chen mused. "But finding comparable luxury accommodations on such short notice, would be challenging, particularly during high season. Unless someone with significant industry influence made it happen, I pointed out. A slow smile spread across Chen's face. You're suggesting I use my connections to secure them an alternative. Honeymoon at a competitor's property. A gesture of goodwill that demonstrates this reconciliation with my uncle is genuine, not just another move in your decades-long chess match. Chen studied me with newfound respect. You continue to surprise me, Ms. Hartwell. Most consultants wouldn't suggest their client direct business to a competitor. I'm not just a consultant in this situation, I reminded him. I'm family to the people caught in the crossfire. After consideration, Chen nodded. I have a relationship with the chairman of the Celestial Group. Their property in Bora Bora is exceptional. Private overwater bungalows, world-class dining, and a setting that rivals even our Azarine. I could have arrangements made by tomorrow morning. At Kairos's expense, I added, making it clear this wasn't just about finding an alternative, but making amends. Of course, Chen agreed. A wedding gift from Kairos Resorts to the Hartwell Mitchell union, with our sincere apologies for any complications. And what of Richard? Chen asked. He may see this as another slight. First, the acknowledgement of his contributions after 30 years, and now his son honeymooning at neither his properties. Nor mine. I'll handle my uncle, I assured him. This isn't about winning or losing anymore. It's about finding a path forward that respects everyone's dignity. I sent Blake a message before boarding the seaplane. Possible solution in the works. Bora instead of Maldives. Completely different resort group, all expenses covered as a wedding gift. We'll confirm details tomorrow. Ask Vanessa to hold off any decisions until then. His reply came immediately. Bora Bora was actually her second choice after the Azarine. This could work if it's really comparable luxury. Thanks, Liv. The seaplane journey offered spectacular views of the Maldivian atolls. As we banked toward the Azarine's arrival pavilion, I caught my first glimpse of the resort, a collection of elegant overwater villas extending from a lush central island, designed to harmonize with the natural environment. This was the physical manifestation of the vision Uncle Richard and Jacob Chen had once shared, a vision only one of them had brought to life. No wonder the wound had festered for 30 years. A welcoming committee awaited at the arrival pavilion. As I was escorted to my villa, a stunning overwater suite with floor-to-ceiling windows framing the lagoon, my phone chimed with a message from Noah. Uncle Richard just heard about the Bora Bora plan from Blake. He's on the warpath again, calling it Chen's ultimate insult to redirect his son to a competitor rather than a Hartwell property. Damage control needed ASAP. I stared at the message in dismay. The resistance I'd anticipated from Uncle Richard had materialized even faster than expected, threatening to unravel all our progress before I'd even unpacked my suitcase. After a brief but desperately needed shower, I called Noah for a more detailed update on Uncle Richard's reaction to the Bora Bora proposal. He's taking it personally, Noah confirmed, his voice tinny through the international connection. Says, Chen is deliberately trying to embarrass him by steering Blake away from Hartwell Properties entirely. It was my suggestion, not Chen's, I clarified, though I doubted that distinction would matter to Uncle Richard. The goal was to find neutral ground. I understand that, but Uncle Richard sees it as Chen saying Kairos won't have them and neither should Hartwell. A lose-lose that makes both hotel groups look bad. I paced the length of my villa, frustration mounting. This isn't about hotel groups. It's about giving Blake and Vanessa a honeymoon they can actually enjoy without family politics overshadowing everything. I know. Noah's voice was sympathetic. But you're dealing with two men who've defined themselves through their hotels for 30 years. They don't separate personal from professional easily. He was right. I'd been approaching this as a logical problem to solve, when at its core, it was an emotional wound that logic couldn't easily address. I need to talk to Uncle Richard directly, I decided. Is he still in Atlanta? No, he's en route to Singapore for meetings. Lands tomorrow morning. That complicated matters. I'd be deep into my first day of consultations by then, and the time difference would make coordinating a call challenging. After ending the call with Noah, I had just enough time to change clothes before my scheduled dinner with Jacob Chen. Despite my fatigue, I knew this meeting was crucial for establishing the parameters of both my consultation and our approach to the mounting honeymoon crisis. Chen had arranged for us to dine at the Azarene's most exclusive venue, a private pavilion perched at the edge of the reef, accessible only by a winding wooden walkway extending over the lagoon. As the sun set in a spectacular display of gold and crimson, casting the overwater villas in silhouette against the darkening sky, I couldn't help but appreciate the masterful integration of luxury and natural beauty that characterized the resort. "The villa is stunning," I acknowledged as Chen greeted me. "The entire resort is a remarkable achievement in sustainable design." A flicker of pride crossed his features. "Thank you. We've worked hard to prove that luxury and sustainability aren't mutually exclusive." "The vision you and my uncle once shared?" I observed quietly. Chen's expression softened slightly at the reference. "Yes, though Richard might dispute the extent of our shared vision after all these years." As our first course arrived, I addressed the crisis directly. "Before we discuss the consultation, we need to address the situation with my cousin's honeymoon. Uncle Richard is unhappy with the Bora Bora solution," Chen sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I received word from my executive team. Richard called our corporate office directly, suggesting the arrangement was a deliberate attempt to embarrass both hotel groups." "It wasn't intended that way," I insisted. "It was meant as a neutral option that wouldn't force Blake and Vanessa to choose sides." "I understand your intention," Chen assured me, "and I believe it was the right approach. But perhaps in trying to find neutral ground, we've inadvertently created a new battlefield." His insight struck me forcefully. By attempting to remove Blake and Vanessa from the competition between Kairos and Hartwell, we'd actually extended that competition to include a third party. "So what do we do now?" I asked. "Blake and Vanessa still need a honeymoon destination. That doesn't make them feel like political pawns." Chen considered the question as our first course arrived. Delicate slices of local tuna presented on a bed of indigenous sea greens. "Perhaps," he said finally, "we've been approaching this from the wrong direction. Instead of looking for neutral territory, what if we embraced the connection between Kairos and Hartwell directly?" "What do you mean?" "The sustainability showcase we've been planning includes the historical acknowledgement of Richard's contribution to the concept," Chen explained, his eyes lighting with new purpose. "What if we accelerated that announcement and made it the centerpiece of a special event, an official reconciliation between Kairos and Hartwell, with Blake and Vanessa as honored guests?" I blinked, trying to follow his thinking. "You want to turn their honeymoon into a public relations event?" "Not their entire honeymoon," Chen clarified. "Just a single evening, a private dinner with Richard and myself, where we formally acknowledge our shared history and look toward future collaboration. After that, Blake and Vanessa could continue their stay at the Azarene as originally planned, but now as symbols of the new relationship between our families and companies rather than as pawns in an old rivalry." The concept was bold, perhaps even brilliant, but fraught with potential complications. "You're suggesting Uncle Richard fly to the Maldives for this reconciliation dinner?" "Precisely. He's already in Singapore for meetings. The Maldives is a short flight away." "And you think he'd agree to this? After 30 years of actively avoiding any association with Kairos?" Chen smiled enigmatically. "Richard has already agreed to the advisory role and the acknowledgement of his contributions. The only question is timing and presentation." I considered the proposal carefully. It was unexpectedly elegant, transforming what had been a source of tension into an opportunity for public reconciliation. Rather than hiding from the complicated history between Kairos and Hartwell, It would celebrate the connection, making Blake and Vanessa's presence at the Azurine meaningful rather than awkward. It could work, I admitted, but only if presented correctly. Uncle Richard can't feel like he's being summoned to your territory, and Blake and Vanessa can't feel like their honeymoon is being co-opted for corporate politics. Agreed on both. Counts, Chen nodded. Which is why I'd like you to make the proposal to Richard. Coming from you, as family, has a different tone than coming from me as a business rival. By the time dessert arrived, a delicate confection of tropical fruits and local honey, I found myself genuinely excited by the possibility. What had begun as a crisis might transform into a meaningful resolution that benefited everyone involved. There's one more element to consider, Chen said as we concluded our meal. If we're truly embracing the connection between Kairos and Hartwell, perhaps we should address the original slight that set these events in motion. The column at the wedding reception, I said, immediately understanding his reference. Precisely. Symbolic slights often carry more weight than their physical reality might suggest. That evening, I drafted careful messages to all the key players in our unfolding drama. To Blake and Vanessa, an explanation of the new proposal that emphasized the potential benefit to their honeymoon experience. To Noah, a briefing on the new approach, asking him to lay groundwork with Uncle Richard before my call. Finally, I composed an email to Uncle Richard himself, knowing he would be checking messages during his flight to Singapore. Uncle Richard, he understand you have concerns about the proposed Bora Bora alternative for Blake and Vanessa's honeymoon. After careful consideration, I believe there's a more fitting solution, one that honors the history between Hartwell and Kairos while creating a positive path forward. Jacob Chen and I have discussed hosting a formal reconciliation dinner at sea. The Azurine during Blake and Vanessa's stay, where your contributions to sustainable luxury hospitality would be acknowledged publicly, and the new collaborative relationship between Hartwell and Kairos would be announced to the industry. This transforms Blake and Vanessa's presence at the Azurine from a potential source of family tension into a meaningful celebration of new beginnings. Following this event, they would continue their honeymoon as planned, now as symbols of bridge building, rather than as unwitting participants in an old rivalry. Olivia. After sending the email, I stepped onto the villa's private deck, the warm tropical breeze carrying the gentle sound of waves. The moonlight illuminated the surrounding villas and the distant curve of the main island, the entire resort a testament to the vision two young men had once shared at Cornell decades earlier. My phone chimed with a response from Blake. Vanessa and I just discussed your proposal. We love it. Having the two hotel titans officially reconciled during our honeymoon makes us feel like we're part of something meaningful rather than caught in the crossfire. Plus, Vanessa says the photos will be amazing. Let us know what Uncle Richard says. Just before midnight, my phone rang. Uncle Richard himself calling from his flight satellite connection. I'll be there, he finally said, his tone resolute. Send the details to my assistant. We'll make this work. As we ended the call, I felt a sense of weightlessness that had nothing to do with my overwater villa's suspension above the lagoon. Something fundamental had shifted, not just in the external arrangements for Blake and Vanessa's honeymoon, but in the internal landscapes of all involved. What had begun with being seated behind a column, a moment of feeling invisible and undervalued, had somehow catalyzed a transformation that now placed me squarely in the role of bridge builder between two proud men whose 30-year estrangement had shaped both their lives and an entire sector of the hospitality industry. The glass-floored, pavilion suspended over the Azurine's most spectacular reef section had been transformed for the evening's reconciliation dinner. Soft lighting illuminated the space, highlighting the elegant table set for 6, Uncle Richard and Aunt Diane, Jacob Chen and his wife Grace, and Blake and Vanessa. As the event coordinator, I would be overseeing rather than attending, a role that felt appropriate given my position as catalyst rather than principal in this decades-old drama. Everything is perfect, Chen assured me as we did a final walkthrough an hour before the guests' arrival. The historical display panels for the Sustainability Showcase have been updated to prominently feature Richard's contributions. The joint press release is drafted for approval after dinner. And Blake and Vanessa? I asked. Enjoying a private spa treatment before the event. They seem remarkably at ease with their role in this historic reconciliation. The past 3 days had been a whirlwind of preparation, not just for the dinner, but for Uncle Richard's arrival. He had insisted on touring the Azurene's sustainability systems before the event, a request Chen had graciously accommodated by arranging a private tour led by the resort's environmental director. I watched from a discreet distance as Uncle Richard examined the solar arrays, water recycling systems, and innovative building materials that made the Azurene a pioneer in eco-luxury. His expression had shifted from skeptical to genuinely impressed as the tour progressed. He designed similar systems for our original concept, Chen had commented quietly, standing beside me. Some of what you're seeing was directly inspired by Richard's early sketches from our Cornell days. Now, as sunset approached and the pavilion glowed with anticipation, I positioned myself near the entrance to greet the guests. Blake and Vanessa arrived first, looking relaxed and radiant, a stark contrast to the tension they'd exhibited just days earlier when caught in the crossfire of family politics. Liv, this is incredible. Blake embraced me warmly. You've transformed what could have been a disaster into something meaningful. The photos are going to be amazing, Vanessa added with a smile, seemingly having overcome her earlier frustrations. Father called this morning to say he's proud we're part of making hospitality history. Uncle Richard and Aunt Diane arrived. Next, followed shortly by Chen and his wife. I held my breath as the two men faced each other for the first time in 30 years. The moment stretched, waited with decades of competition and resentment, before Chen extended his hand. Richard, it's been too long. Uncle Richard hesitated only briefly before clasping Chen's hand firmly. Jacob, your resort is impressive. Our concept, Chen corrected gently. Implemented differently than we once imagined, but rooted in the vision we developed together. Something shifted in Uncle Richard's expression, a softening around the eyes, a slight relaxation of his perpetually squared shoulders. Yes, I recognized some familiar ideas during the sustainability tour. As the couples took their seats, I signaled the service staff to begin, then stepped back to observe from the pavilion's edge. The conversation started cautiously, focused on Blake and Vanessa's wedding and honeymoon plans, but gradually shifted toward the shared history that had brought them all together. I've often wondered, I overheard Aunt Diane say to Grace Chen, how differently things might have unfolded if the three of us had handled that final semester at Cornell with more maturity. Grace nodded thoughtfully. Jacob has said the same. Youth and pride make a volatile combination. By the time dessert was served, the atmosphere had transformed from polite formality to something approaching genuine warmth. Chen raised his glass in a toast that silenced the table. To Richard Hartwell, whose early insights into sustainable luxury hospitality helped shape what would eventually become Kairos Resorts. Tonight, we formally acknowledge that contribution and look forward to a new chapter of collaboration rather than competition. Uncle Richard cleared his throat, visibly moved despite his efforts to maintain his composure. And to Jacob Chen, who had the vision and determination to bring our shared concept to life, even when our partnership faltered. The Azurene stands as testament to what might have been, and perhaps what still could be. Blake caught my eye. Across the pavilion, raising his glass slightly in my direction, an acknowledgement of my role in orchestrating this moment of reconciliation. I nodded in return, a lump forming in my throat at the sight of these two families finding common ground after so many years of division. After dinner, as the two men walked together along the moonlit boardwalk discussing the joint press release, Vanessa approached me with an unexpected question. "Did you know?" she asked quietly. "About the column at the reception?" I hesitated, unsure how to respond. Blake told me, she continued, that you were deliberately seated where you couldn't see anything. She looked genuinely distressed. It was my mother's doing. She reorganized several tables at the last minute. I had no idea until Blake mentioned your conversation about it. It's in the past, I assured her, surprised by how little the slight bothered me now. And, unintentionally, it set in motion everything that led to tonight. Vanessa studied me thoughtfully. You know, when we first decided on the Azarine, my father was against it specifically because of its connection to Chen. He only relented because I insisted. She smiled ruefully. Now he's taking credit for being part of this historic reconciliation. Life has a strange way of coming full circle. Indeed, it did. As I watched Uncle Richard and Jacob Chen standing side by side at the pavilion's edge, silhouetted against the moonlit ocean, I marveled at how a petty slight at a wedding reception had cascaded into this moment of healing for two families and, potentially, an entire industry. The following morning, the joint press release made headlines in hospitality publications worldwide. Pioneer hoteliers reconcile after 30 years. Hartwell and Kairos announce historic collaboration on sustainable luxury initiatives. Accompanying the announcement was a photograph of Uncle Richard and Jacob Chen shaking hands at the Azarine, with Blake and Vanessa beaming beside them. My phone buzzed continuously with messages from industry colleagues and family members, but the one that meant the most came from Noah. From behind a column to center stage. Only you could have pulled this off, Liv. As Blake and Vanessa departed for the private island villa portion of their honeymoon, now a joyful continuation of their celebration rather than an awkward compromise, Uncle Richard pulled me aside. I underestimated you, he said simply. You saw an opportunity for reconciliation where I could only see old grievances. Sometimes fresh eyes see what familiar ones cannot, I replied. He nodded thoughtfully. Jacob and I are discussing a joint venture, a new eco-luxury concept that draws on both our approaches. We'd like your consulting firm to oversee the sustainability framework. The professional opportunity was significant, but the personal meaning behind it, recognition of my expertise from the uncle who had once dismissed my career choices, meant even more. As I returned to my sustainability consultation work at the Azarine, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey that had brought me here. Being seated behind that column had initially felt like the perfect symbol of how the Hartwell side of my family viewed me. Peripheral, unimportant, easy to obscure. Yet that very marginalization had positioned me perfectly to eventually step forward as a bridge builder. Sometimes being forced to the sidelines creates the perspective needed to see the whole field more clearly than those in the center of play. In canceling, or more accurately, transforming, my cousin's honeymoon resort plans, I hadn't just resolved a family crisis. I'd helped heal a 30-year wound that had shaped two families and an entire approach to hospitality. And in the process, I'd finally found my own place at the table, no columns in sight. Looking for more? We've got two amazing stories ready. For you right on screen, if this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.